Hi, Matt. Hi, Mandisa. Thank you guys for taking my call.
Thanks for waiting.
Thank you.
Hey, you bet. You know, to be honest with you, after listening to Mandisa, she's really got me motivated. I just want to spend the time talking about how to launch my own business.
Okay.
No, not really. Well, the reason I'm calling today, guys, I don't know if you have it there in your notes. I am a conflicted Christian. I don't go to church. I haven't been to church in years, but I do believe in God. Mm-hmm. The problem I'm having is there is a lot in the Bible that I just cannot reconcile, such as the concept of hell, the treatment of women. You know, Matt's talked about slavery. I'm just having a really hard time, guys. And my point is, I'm talking to everybody on the spectrum, from atheists, and the next person I invite to my house is going to be my grandma's pastor.
I tell you, immediately when you started mentioning this, I thought of a joke, and it's not a joke. I mean, a humorous thing. I would think that both a preacher and myself would say that your problem is you haven't been to church enough. He thinks you haven't been to church enough because it'll clear these issues up, and I think you haven't been to church enough because it will expand them. And you know that I understand your frustration, but I want to let kind of Mandisa talk to you a little bit. Maybe she may get to it in a different way than I can.
Well, it's interesting because in going into my background a bit more, I wasn't formally raised in the church. So, but having been exposed to Christianity, Islam, and just other religious perspectives, and all of that stuff seemed so restrictive to me, and it just seemed outright wrong.
Yeah.
So I can, and my indoctrination did include like some, I had to unlearn some of these ideas that, that were subjective to women, as well as this idea of, of hell. And I just find that I know I could say I could never, I couldn't reconcile, first of all, that, a child who died, through no fault of their own could possibly be subjected to a hell that, first of all, that has no proof of existence, not even a heaven. And so, and I understand that, people who have grown up in the church and who grew up, believing these things and being taught these things, when you start seeing some of the things that even these very quote unquote good Christians do, that it can be very conflicting. And so I know that it's probably, I know people may want these, this God to exist, or, they may, the whole, like I said, the fire and the hell fire and brimstone thing, it's very, very scary to a lot of people. And that could be one of the factors that if you stop believing, perhaps then you might just automatically go to hell. And so, that's kind
of my question for you, Traci. So you're having difficulty reconciling things in the Bible, all right? Is there anything that anybody could ever say? Like if God himself came down and offered an explanation why he's seemingly pro-slavery, anti-woman, anti-this, even if he thought is there anything that could ever justify that for you?
For me, no.
Okay.
Right.
Now, given the fact that until a God even attempts to try to do this, the only other option you have is to have a bunch of other flawed humans who have somehow managed to rationalize these awful things because of their God belief. Clearly, they're not going to be able to convince you either. I mean, they would clearly be less convincing than the God himself, or herself, or itself, or they-self, or
themselves.
Yeah. So, given that you have, what is it that you still kind of believe or are clinging to? Is it just some abstract feel-good God thing that maybe isn't tied to any religion, or is it maybe kind of, as Mandisa was talking about, more of a fear of acknowledging that perhaps you don't believe?
Right.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. See, the God that I grew up with, I've heard Matt talk about this before, that in church, they conveniently leave out certain verses. Now I understand why, because some of them are downright brutal.
Yes,
nobody wants to hear about
dashing children against the rocks, and
Right. And I'll be honest with you, I'm one of these people that have not read the Bible cover to cover. I'm being completely honest about
Same
that.
here. Not formally having been
Yeah.
raised religious, I haven't either, but I know enough about it to know that there is some really, really bad stuff in there.
Yeah, that nonsense about you need to read the whole Bible is just as bad as the nonsense of, well, you need to read it in the original Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. And all. No. If there is a God, and this God is using a book to communicate with people, that God's already an idiot.
Yeah.
Because he's communicating in languages that change and die out, which demonstrates he's not particularly bright. If there's not a Bible 2.0 and 3.0, et cetera, throughout all of this, if God's not giving updates to clear up the clear miscommunication that has occurred, then he's failed. So what is the reason? By the way, the strongest argument I can think of against the existence of a God is the argument from divine hiddenness, the fact that we don't see what we would expect to see if there was a caring God. If you were God,
Right.
if you were God and people got the message wrong or found your original message problematic or offensive or in opposition to what they felt was right, wouldn't you contact them and say, no, here's what I meant?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how is it that anybody could believe that there's a God who is morally perfect, and yet they acknowledge that they would do something that their God fails to do every single second?
Right. And you know the answer that I usually receive, because I've asked hardcore Christians about that. They're like, well, look at the verse that says, what is it? How does it go? My ways are not yours, or something like that.
Oh, goodness gracious.
You know what? You know who else can say that? Satan.
Who?
Yeah.
Satan.
Oh,
Yeah.
Danny?
I mean, for the people who believe in God and Satan, I always ask them the same thing. How did you figure out that God was the good one and Satan was the evil one? Oh, well, God's the one that says he's good. Well, isn't that what the evil one would say?
Yeah. And I think perhaps there's the underlying, well, you are basically better than your God, than the God you believe in. And that is a scary thought for a lot of people.
It is.
It is scary to understand and come to the realization that what you have been taught to believe is a falsehood. But to actually verbalize that takes strength and courage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what keeps many people conflicted. And it's okay to say, you know what? Okay, I may have been wrong, or the people who may have taught this to me are wrong.
So if you've got some version of God that you believe in, then I'm going to ask you the question that is basically the trademark of the show. Why? What is it that you believe in? Why?
See, I knew that was coming, and I mentally prepared for that.
Awesome.
I knew that was coming. Why do I believe? To be honest, it's what I was taught. It's what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was saying, the type of God that I was taught about was very kind, loving. He, wrapped you in warmth in his arms. And it's the more I read the Bible and I listen to the Atheist Experience, Talk Heathen, all these differing views, I'm like, this guy's a bully.
Yeah.
Well, let's stick with the God that you actually believe in, because you don't believe in a God that's a bully. You believe in a God that you were raised with. Now, the first question is, do you think the fact that you were raised with an idea is a good reason to believe it?
Not necessarily.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the second one is, if you believe in a God that is loving and wraps you in his arms, how many times have you actually experienced that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
For me, verifiable times that I've experienced that is zero. And so in much the same way, and I know I'm going to piss off some Christians because, how dare you compare, God to Santa Claus. The thing is, you can convince somebody that Santa Claus brings you presents every year, and there's actually more evidence for that than there is that there's a loving God who wraps his arms around you and protects you, because at least somebody's faking that part for you. And what we have in a directly analogous situation is that there are communities that will fake the sort of love that you think that you're getting from a God. And this reinforces it. So when you're in your church, and I know you haven't been in ages, but when you're in that community, those people are doing good things. They are being nice. They are helping you out with stuff. They are expressing love. And many of them think that they are doing it on behalf of their God, yet they have no more evidence for their God than you do. And from my perspective, what they're actually doing is being decent human beings, which is why we have the Atheist Community of Austin with a whole bunch of people on the other side here who we're all going to hang out and visit with. And if somebody out there, if their car broke down in the parking lot and they couldn't get out here, I guarantee you somebody here is taking them where they need to go. And if somebody shows up, I mean, we are doing a better job of building these communities. Mandisa has been doing it with Black non-believers. There's also Oasis, Sunday Assembly, a lot of secular things that end up getting labeled church, although I have issues with that.
Right.
Not because it's a religious thing, but because it's specifically Protestant, so it's not as encompassing. And community is the right word. And so if all the good that I've experienced is actually coming from people, telling me there's a God that loves me and is expressing this love through people is no different from telling me that there's a Santa Claus who's going to bring me presents, and Santa Claus expresses that through my parents bringing them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that makes total sense, Mandisa. I appreciate it. The other two things, do I have time for two quick things?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. My grandma, who is 90 years old, she's one of the most amazing people in my life. She's also a hardcore Christian.
Leave her alone.
She's the one that, right, I know. Trust me, you're right.
My grandma's 90 years old as well. She knows I'm a non-believer. I want to interact with her in the remaining years of her life in a way that is good and positive. It's not going to hurt me at all if she dies still believing in Jesus. And it's not going to fulfill my life for me to convince my grandmother that she's wrong, because my goal is not to convince people that they're wrong. My goal is to let people try to convince me that they're right and expose when that's flawed. And when it comes to interactions with my grandma, I just want to sit there and play cards with her and have dinner and laugh at stuff. And that's it.
Yes, my grandmother's 89 years old. She is extremely religious. I tolerate the calls a few times a year where it's praise the Lord, Jesus, I have to tolerate that, because I'm not going to have this conversation with her. I may have it with some of my aunts and uncles and sometimes my parents or the other people that I know are closer to me. That's totally fine. And it is okay to have, it is okay to do that. It is okay to be, discerning about who you have these conversations with and who you don't.
And also, it's about who wants to have the conversation. If my grandma comes to me and says she wants to talk to me about this,
sure,
I am always going to be honest and open. I'll talk to my grandma till I'm blue in the face, if that's what she wants. But in much the same way, the joke that we've used many times is we take incoming calls, we don't make outgoing calls. I'm not going door to door knocking, hey, have you stopped believing in Jesus yet? And I will treat my family.
You can fix that.
Yeah, but also, if I see somebody praying at a table at dinner and I don't know them, I'm not going to go up and talk to them or any of that other stuff. And so it's not that I'm treating my family necessarily vastly different or special. I have a different relationship with them. And from their perspective, if they don't tell me about Jesus, they are being rude because they are trying to save me from hell. And I get that. I get that that's how they view this. That's why they have to share it. I don't have to share my atheism with them. I don't have to try to convince them they're wrong, because as far as I can tell, they're going to die in kind of ignorant bliss. So it's not a big deal. What was the second thing?
Oh, sure. Thank you. The other thing is just the thought of, okay, now on the other side, there was my grandpa, who I called Papa, and he was not a religious man. I don't know that he was saved, but my Papa was, again, one of the best people I've ever met. And the thought of a man like that burning in hell, that really, really bothers me. Right. My grandpa was one of the most gentle, beautiful, loving men that ever lived.
Right. And it is so.
I can't.
I'm sorry. It is okay to be angry with that concept. It really is. Yeah. And even as a believer, it is okay for you to, if you have someone in your life who is either non-religious, atheist, or humanist, and they are genuinely good people, and what you believe actually says that they will go to hell because they don't believe as you do, it is okay for you to say, wait a minute.
It is just.
Something sounds wrong with that.
I did a video called Y'all Just Want to Sin, because for a long time I told people I wanted atheists to have really good reasons, intellectual reasons for why they don't believe. And when somebody says, y'all just want to sin and that's why you don't believe in God, you should avoid that. And the video I did specifically to reverse that, because if they're saying this to somebody that's gay, they're saying, oh, you don't believe in God because God doesn't want you to have gay sex and you want to have gay sex. So you just want to. The answer to that is yes, that is right, because I'm not convinced this is wrong and your God's telling me it is. And one of the quickest solutions to all of these things, which I used earlier, is put yourself in God's shoes and ask you what you do. So set aside all of the misogyny and the racism and all of the other problems. Just focus on the one problem that you're talking about. You have a grandparent who was an amazing individual who you loved, and it is likely under the model that he is burning in hell. Now, put yourself in God's position. Put yourself in God's position, but don't do this with respect to whether or not you think God is just. If you were God and you saw you on earth agonizing over the fact that this good man was burning in hell, would you actually come down and talk to you? Or would you let this person continue to sit there in agony? Because a loving God, seeing that you are upset that a relative is perhaps in hell, would at least come down to comfort you, or maybe offer an explanation you could understand. And the fact that he doesn't do that every second of the day means that he's also morally bankrupt. So even if he exists, and you could maybe rationalize a way to believe that he exists, he's still a monster and unworthy of worship or reverence.
Right. I mean, you would think, because I had my sister, I think it was my sister, because she is an atheist, described him as not only a bully, but the ultimate deadbeat dad.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
So
absentee landlord, godfather, all of those. Yeah. And none of these things, when you assess them, yes, apologists will talk all day about how, you're oversimplifying. You're not considering this, and you're not considering this, and God's perfect justice and everything else. No. Well, God's ways aren't our ways, and his ways are mysterious, and he has problems communicating with you. Fuck that.
Right.
If he created us and he has problems communicating with us, that's his damn problem. It's not ours. If you create a game and you're supposed to be telling the people in the game what to do and they're not able to understand you, that's your fault for making the game. What kind of God would create beings that cannot understand him? What kind of God would create beings that would desperately need him to explain something to them, and then he can't ever explain it or won't? Yeah. It is absolutely preposterous, any of these models. When I talk about atheism, and I talk about non-theism in the sense that I am not convinced a God exists, there is also the proposition that I am convinced certain gods cannot exist and do not exist. And if you tell me that there is a loving God that can interact with the universe, I'm going to tell you you're full of shit, because there's not evidence to support that at all. There's evidence to directly contradict that. Whether or not there's some God I don't know about hanging out up there doing nothing, I don't know. I can't prove it. I can't falsify that. You know what else? I don't care about that God. That's a useless God.
Right.
Has no impact on my life.
And also when people talk about, asking the question of why there are so many blacks that believe in God, it was certainly due to the subjugation during slavery. And we asked the question of, yes, if this God is so loving, if this God cared about our condition, if it brought us through all of these injustices, then why would it have allowed us to have been enslaved in the first place? And also, we have to ask those questions. And we have to discuss that.
It doesn't have to be the simple thing of why didn't God liberate us from slavery and take out it could have been something as simple as, why didn't God at least come down and say, I know things are terrible for you right now, and I know you're not going to understand this, but I wanted to come down and personally let you know that things are going to get better, and this will serve a good purpose in the end. That's what theists are claiming that God is doing, except that he's not actually doing it.
Right. Nope, not at all.
I just got a warm, fuzzy feeling that God's eventually going to take care of us all. Well, screw your warm, fuzzy feeling. I'm getting beaten. I'm starving.
Right. The idea of suffering in this life to prepare for an afterlife is a very, very preposterous and very, very dangerous way to live. And it's a dangerous mindset to have, because then you actually perpetuate that through generations.
Yep.
And it has been perpetuated through generations. And it really, really has done damage to our community.
And it devalues everything.
It really does.
This life becomes a place to wipe your feet before the real life begins. That means everything you've ever experienced, everybody you've ever loved, every person you've ever cared about, all of them in the grand scheme of things were irrelevant, because the short little 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years you might spend here is infinitesimally small compared to an eternity in the good place, not the TV show, which is awesome, by the way.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you should. It's on Netflix. You can watch the first 2 seasons. It's a rip-roaring laugh for me. But
thank you for the recommendation.
Thank you for your time, and we're going to move on to some other calls. Appreciate it, Traci. And by the way, call in and check in with us from time to time, and you can also call Talk Even. I know those guys that love to talk to you. And by the way, I don't mean that in the sense that we've now discovered that Traci is transitioning from Christianity to atheism.
Right,
we want to mark her progress. It's just about getting information out to people so that they know that they're not the only ones going through this.
Right.
And you've seen other people on the show in similar situations to you. and it's why we do what we do.
Yeah. Well, guys, I really appreciate your time, and I will call back in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.